The chandeliers of Versailles blazed as the prince entered, parading his mistress on his arm, her jewels scattering light like daggers into the eyes of those forced to admire her. He smiled with cruel arrogance, flaunting her beauty not out of love, but out of spite, his silent punishment for the wife he scorned. At the edge of the hall, the princess appeared, draped not in excess, but in quiet dignity, her calm presence cutting sharper than any jewel. Gasps spread through the court as pride and humiliation collided beneath the gilded mirrors, and in that instant, no one knew that the very spectacle meant to shame her would become the downfall of the prince himself. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The prince waited in the antechamber because he liked the echo there. It gave his name weight. Every step sounded larger than it was, polished leather on marble, the faint jingle of a sword that was more ornament than weapon. Behind him, servants adjusted cuffs and settled lace so meticulously that it felt like armor. He let them. Vanity was a wall he knew how to build. He could feel the hall beyond before he saw it. The brighter heat of candles, the sweeter air, heavy with rose water and wine. The murmurs, not yet a roar, of people who had come to gaze at one another and measure their standings in the glint of crystal. He lifted his chin, smoothing a strand of powdered hair that had escaped. "The music is ready," said a footman at his shoulder. The man didn't look up. None of them did. Their voices were made to slide under courtly noise, too soft to offend, too direct to be ignored. He nodded. "And she?" "She is waiting, Your Highness." He turned, and there she was, posed as if she had grown out of carved paneling. His mistress was beautiful in the way that made eyes travel. Light gathered on her skin and lingered there. Her gown caught the candlelight like a net. She had asked for color, and he had granted it. The court was an ocean of pale. She would stand out. She smiled at him, and he saw not affection, but gleam. Admiration reflected back and amplified. That was the point. "We enter?" he asked. "If you wish," she said. The words were simple. The way she stood said more. She had learned how to be seen. He had taught her, and she had taught herself the rest. He offered his arm. Her fingers rested on his sleeve like a promise. He thought about the murmurs that had chased him these last weeks, soft snickers behind painted fans, the jokes that hid in compliments. When the city grumbled, the court laughed. When the court laughed, it looked for someone to blame. He would not give them his fear. He would give them spectacle. The double doors opened on a breath. Light rushed in, and with it sound. Violins climbed a polite staircase of notes, and then curtsied. The chandeliers shook their crystals like rain, throwing shards of light across gilded molding, and faces powdered to a faultless smoothness. The hall of mirrors held 100 versions of his vanity and offered them all back to him. Eyes turned as he entered. He felt the glide of attention like heat against his throat. He measured the expressions, envy worn as courtesy, curiosity sharpened into cruelty, admiration posed as indifference. He had walked into rooms like this since childhood. He knew how to surf the tide. His mistress's hand tightened on his arm for a heartbeat and then relaxed. She knew, too. Her gaze rose above heads and chandeliers and landed squarely on the space where power was not a throne, but a circle of watchers. "Slowly," he said under his breath. "Always," she answered. They paced the edge of the hall in a path that had been practiced in dozens of rooms and never admitted as a dance. Servants flowed the other way, all quiet hands and quick feet, bearing silver and crystal. Fans fluttered like birds about to take wing. Laughter spilled in measured drafts that stopped just short of vulgarity. He felt the curve of every mouth, the prickle of every whisper on the back of his neck. He dipped his head to a cluster of nobles that represented yesterday's power and tomorrow's nervousness. Smiles bloomed like forced roses. His mistress tilted hers to the same group, her eyelids lowered, her lashes a veil thin enough to see through. He heard someone say his name in a tone that invited agreement. He gave them something better, a view. He could have stopped to greet them. He did not. He wanted the court to follow him with its eyes, not with its feet. The orchestra made a sound like a question. He did not answer. "Your Highness," someone said, stepping near enough to be noticed and far enough not to be presumptuous. A courtier, neither friend nor enemy, which meant dangerous. He gave them a glance that promised he might recall their face later. He would not. They would believe he had. The mistress's perfume found his mouth when he inhaled. Honey and smoke. He placed her before him, as if placing a seal on a letter. His letter to every story told about him was simple. See what I can claim. It was not love he was displaying, it was control. He felt the absence then, the hollow shape of a person not present. She had said nothing. She had been kept away, if not by his request, then by his behavior. It was easier to humiliate what did not appear. He found that thought comforting and petty. He did not chase it away. Applause rose not for him, but for an arrangement of flowers being carried toward the head table. A ridiculous thing to clap for, which was why it fit. He smiled because it was expected. He listened to the hall breathe, to the 100 little intermissions that made up a social evening in a palace whose walls had seen everything and remembered it all. Would they approve tonight? Would the eyes that had mocked soften? He didn't need kindness. He needed awe. Awe could be managed. Awe could be fractured into gossip that served him. He was not given a warning. No rustle at the door told him to brace. The court did not prepare him. It did not prepare itself. She entered. The princess crossed the threshold without music. The music bent around her anyway. He felt it, a cord that pulled. The hall widened and narrowed all at once. Fans slowed. Voices found endings and did not begin again. Even the servants trained to be blind misstepped, and a spoon chimed against a dish like a startled bell. She wore no excess. No froth of lace, no jewels heavy enough to claim their own gravity. Her gown washed over the floor like water. The light caught, not on wealth, but on skin, and the calm that comes when a person has decided to walk into humiliation and not drown. Her face did not ask permission. It did not ask anything. It showed nothing extra. That made people stare harder. He felt something char on his pride. He kept his smile. It had cost too much to learn to hold it. He thought absurdly of weather. There had been a storm one summer that dragged at the windows all afternoon, and the sky went a color that made animals quiet. She was that. Not thunder, pressure. The thing before. Next to him, his mistress leaned in by a degree. She came, she said, the small words covering a continent of calculation. She came, he repeated. Her eyes slid sideways to measure him. He did not allow measurement. He moved forward, because movement was what he had. The hall, his instrument, would be played. If the princess had come to take back dignity, he would drown it in light. The princess paused at the edge of the group that had ceased to laugh, ceased to speak. People remembered they possessed bodies and arranged them, making space without making a point. She accepted the space like a gift set at her feet. Her hand, the one that held a fan, hovered at her waist, steady. A servant, braver than his status allowed, approached her with a question that lifted itself into the air and died, answered with a flicker of the princess's fingers. She did not dismiss anyone. She dismissed fear. She moved stillness through a sea of silk and made it look like walking. He told himself she had come because she knew she would lose if she did not, because absence can become guilt. He told himself many things in the span of a breath. They arranged themselves like cards he would lay down if anyone challenged him. The distance between them closed until it was close enough to count breaths. He dipped his head in acknowledgement because not to would have been a declaration of war bigger than he wanted to fight within his own house. The acknowledgement contained nothing of apology. She received it as it was. "Your Highness," he said, with a smile used for people he intended to charm. "Your Highness," she answered, with a voice that did not lift or lower. A period, not a question. His mistress stood within the angle of his arm. He felt her watching the princess. He felt the princess not watching her in return. The orchestra, sensing the moment had lengthened past its measure, began again. The minuet unfolded like a map that people use to find their paths back to normal. He did not allow normal. He raised his hand toward the center of the hall. The gesture was nothing and everything. Musicians tightened the weave of sound. Servants slid into and out of sight. A space opened for the first dance. "Shall we?" he said, turning just enough that his mistress would move before a second thought could form. She moved. He led her into the cleared portion of the floor where 24 dances had been performed and judged tonight alone. It was not an invitation extended to his wife. His wife did not require it. He didn't offer it. He was speaking a language that had no words and many witnesses. He placed a hand where he was allowed. He bowed as much as the moment demanded, and no more. She sank into her opening shape with a grace that would have won wars in a different era. They stepped together, then apart, bodies saying a precise set of things that had been agreed on by people dead a century who still ruled the living. From the corner of his eye, he tracked the princess. He would not say he watched her. That word was too intimate. He tracked her the way a man in a forest learns to know where the trees are when he runs. Her expression did not change. That, too, was a statement. She did not allow his display to create a wound he could point to and call her weak. She did not grant him that. What would it take to crack that surface, to make her show something that could be used or soothed? He turned his mistress with a flourish that drew a crescent of attention. The fans did that fluttering again, the sound like a soft tide. He bent close enough to say through his teeth, "They will watch for my hand." "They already are," she replied. "Do not drop it." He did not. He performed perfection. The steps were measured, refined. Too refined to be a battle, too sharp to be play. He felt admiration catching like burrs. He felt disapproval bending around the edges, present but less delicious. He made a point of laughing at nothing. The sound carried. He showed teeth because humans like to be reminded of animals while pretending they did not contain one. Still, the princess did not break. She moved through the crowd with a calm that made people forget their own tricks. An older woman, forgotten by many but not by her, straightened under the princess's glance as if remembering her youth. Two men with heads together separated when the princess approached. She had no army. She did not need one. He felt a tremor in his chest that had nothing to do with the dance and everything to do with memory he refused to examine. He commanded it away and executed a turn with a precision that made even the orchestra sit straighter. A servant passed with a decanter. He could have taken a glass mid-step and made it look effortless. He did not. He wanted no distractions in his hands. His mistress's hand burned through fabric. He marveled suddenly and foolishly at how much heat a human palm could hold when ambition ignited it. He guided her forward toward the place where the princess had chosen to rest her gaze. He did not plan the cruelty. He simply swam the current of it. Around the floor, the court composed itself for the spectacle it had come to consume. Laughter dropped in pitch. Conversations folded. Even the rustle of skirts economized into a hush. The servants drew back to the walls like the tide slipping from shore. The air tightened. The princess reached the nearest settee and sat. The cushion accepted her with a sigh. Her fan tilted in her hand. It was a small one, appropriate for someone who did not need to build wind where there was already a storm. The bones of it, carved pale, made a delicate ladder for light to run across. She opened it and closed it with a measured pulse, the pulse of someone whose heart had decided its speed and would not be hurried. He kept his face arranged. He drew his mistress into a figure that placed his back to the princess for 3 beats, then his profile for 3, then his full gaze. He did not let his eyes show that he noticed. He let the dance carry him where it would, and pretended he chose. The music swelled. The flourish came. He presented his mistress to the room, his arm carving a line that said, "Look at this, Look at me. It was the oldest trick. It rarely failed. For a heartbeat he felt what he had come for. The room leaning. The glint of approval half-formed. The shriveled fruit of envy plumping with juice he would drink later, retold as praise. He reached for it. The princess's fan slipped. It fell as if the air had thickened around it, as if time had made polite space. It slipped. It turned. Its carved ribs caught a beam from a chandelier, and the whole room watched it turn once, twice, and strike the polished floor with a sound that was soft and catastrophic. The orchestra faltered, then stopped, as if instruments were not built to play while a thing like that happened. Silence came on so fast it seemed someone had snuffed it with a hand. He froze, not in body, because bodies at court are trained against freezing, but in something more private. The dance did not end. It collapsed like a tent when a pole is pulled. The sound the fan made was not loud, but it went everywhere. It touched servants and nobles equally. It tucked itself into ears and refused to leave. It was a sound that was also a question. Who will raise it? He could feel eyes turn not to the fan but to his hands. All his practice told him what to do if he were a better man, or a different one. He told himself he was weighing dignity against performance. He told himself there was strategy in waiting. He told himself many things in the space of 3 heartbeats that were louder than they should have been. His mistress's fingers trembled for the first time. A small, almost nothing movement, but in a room where nothing was missed, it was noticed. She looked at him, not at the fan, at him. She knew, as he did, the code that had governed rooms like this longer than either of them had been alive. Beyond the immediate circle, the court had gone as still as it could while still breathing. A cough would have been a weapon. No one dared. The princess did not move. Her gaze flicked once to the fan, and then rose. It found his face. There was no plea in it. There was no forgiveness waiting to be dispensed if he did the right thing. There was only a truth offered without ornament. He had made this moment. He could unmake it. He could not unmake its memory. He felt the weight of that knowledge like a hand between his shoulder blades. It did not push. It held him where he stood and asked him to decide. The chandelier above trembled. A draft had found it. Crystals chimed together, a small, bright rain. Wax beaded, fat and slow, at the lips of candles. Somewhere a servant's shoe creaked. The noise sounded as loud as a drum in the hush. He imagined, only for a breath, stepping forward, bending, taking the fan in his hand, and handing it back to the woman who had carried his name with a kind of dignity he had not paid for. He imagined the split in the court's mouth, half of it calling him weak, the other half pretending they had always wanted this. He imagined the relief in his chest for choosing a thing that did not make him feel smaller. Then he remembered why he had come to the hall the way he had. He remembered the jokes that tasted like ash, because he laughed at them with everyone else. He remembered that awe is not given, it is taken. He kept his feet where they were. His mistress shifted. The space between her and the fan felt like a valley he could not cross without changing shape. He did not change shape. He became heavier, denser, as if his bones had chosen stone. In the quiet, the court leaned forward. No one spoke. No one had to. There are moments when rooms think, and everyone hears them. The mistress took a breath that touched his wrist. It was a trembling intake and a steady release. She let go of his arm. The movement was small and total. Without asking permission, without a glance to the princess, she stepped toward the fallen fan. And the prince did not move. The mistress lowered herself, the silk of her skirt whispering against the polished floor, as if the hall itself had leaned down to listen. The fan lay like a small wounded bird, carved ribs catching the light, lilies glimmering pale as bone. She did not rush. She measured the space, felt the eyes, felt the prince's stillness behind her like a wall that refused to move. She picked up the fan with 2 fingers and the lightest graze of her other hand, careful to make it look like reverence and not possession. Time stretched just long enough for the court to taste the choice. She rose. The hall exhaled in a thin ribbon. She turned to the princess and extended the fan with a smile that had been practiced in mirrors and sharpened on hunger. "Your Highness." The princess accepted the fan without flinching. Her fingers closed over the cool sticks, the silk whispering once as it settled into her hand. Her gaze touched the mistress's face and moved past as if nothing of consequence had occurred. "Thank you." The mistress felt heat flicker in her throat and then die. No triumph. No flinch she could hoard. The gesture had landed, but not where she had hoped. She shifted her weight, aware of the prince a breath away and the court measuring the gap between them. Eyes asked a simple, terrible question. If the mistress could bend, what would the prince do? He did not step forward. He did not apologize. He did not rescue the moment. He merely blinked once, slowly, as if the hall were too bright. The orchestra scrambled for cues like men picking up scattered coins. Bows lifted. The first notes returned thin and ragged, then gathered themselves with a dignity born of habit. Conversation, shocked into silence, tried on a laugh and wore it poorly. Servants, pale with relief, resumed their patterns against the walls. The mistress let herself be guided to the center, because to refuse would be to admit she needed a permission he had not offered. Her arm returned to his sleeve and held, not for support, but to anchor a story. The story said, "We meant this." The story lied. He moved as if his body had never forgotten how to charm a room. The steps were exact. The angle of his head gave people a view they would remember. But beneath his skin, his pulse beat unevenly, and the mistress felt it through the wool and linen, and a rhythmic drum telling on him. She kept her mouth close enough for her words to belong to him if anyone asked. "They saw," she said. "They were meant to," he answered, smiling for the ceiling. "They saw you hesitate." The smile never left her face. Only the smallest muscles at her jaw spoke of tension. "They saw us recover," he said. Recover was generous. The room had decided to be merciful, because cruelty is more delicious when the victim tries to stand. The mistress turned with him, letting the light carve them into a tableau. She felt stares like pins along her shoulders. She wore them as decoration. He leaned toward her with a show of indulgence. "You did well. I did what you did not." She breathed the sentence and watched it vanish into the air between them. If he heard the barb, he refused to bleed. They brushed the edge of the circle where the princess had taken her seat. Candlelight sat on her like a blessing someone had forgotten to revoke. The fan in her hand opened and closed with a steady rhythm, neither nervous nor vain. The mistress tried to savor the fact that her fingers had been the last to touch it before those pale, controlled hands. The sweetness tasted thin. "Smile," the prince murmured. She did. It landed like a slap on the polished floor and slid away. The princess did not need to claim space. The space claimed her. People arranged themselves at angles to her presence, careful, admiring, hungry. She felt the weight of their appraisal like a corset tightened too far. She breathed against it, letting the pain become a fact and not a message. The fan rested in her palm, warm now where the mistress's touch had been cool. She looked at the lilies stitched into the silk, familiar, delicate, stubborn. She had chosen them long ago when symbols were gifts, not weapons. Now the fan was both. The music resumed its graceful architecture around her. The prince and the mistress traced the design with competence that would be called beauty if no one cared to look beneath it. She watched without blinking, because blinking would be read as weakness, and weakness would be read as guilt, and guilt would feed the hall. A young noblewoman hovered near, a figure from the corner of her vision, then thought better of any approach and retreated. The princess felt a brief tenderness for the girl's confusion. Kindness at court was a currency so rare that it was almost obscene. She folded it away. She could not use it now. A servant passed with a silver tray. The princess took a glass, because not to would make an issue out of thirst, The wine stained the rim, and not her mouth. She placed the glass back as soon as it would be noticed. She knew the game in this room better than anyone believed she did. She let her eyes settle on the prince's face when he was far enough away not to feel it and near enough to be reached. She saw the performance and the crack beneath. He knew he had failed a test that no one would write down, but everyone would remember. He had chosen spectacle over mercy. He had always been better at the former. The latter had never won him applause. She lifted the fan once and hid her mouth behind it briefly, not to conceal emotion, but to make the gossipers around her feel they were clever for imagining it. She would give them a shadow. They would invent a storm. Across the floor, his laughter found her, bright, unnecessary, precise. It skimmed across her skin and broke. She imagined what it would be to have him laugh in their rooms as if his joy belonged to no one else. The thought embarrassed her. She let it go. "Your Highness," someone said with a small bow that did not block her view. A courtier she did not bother to recognize brought words curled like ribbons. "A toast will be called." "To what?" she asked. He smiled with his eyes and not his mouth. "To constancy." She nodded once. The word cut several ways. The court liked words that did. The dance reached a figure that required separation, a clean drifting apart before a return. The prince turned at the edge and, for a beat, faced the princess squarely. He did not bow. He did not need to. The refusal was itself a display. She did not lower her gaze. He was not a god. He was a man in powder and lace who had lost his way inside his own need to be adored. The mistress felt that look pass over her shoulder like cold air from a door opened in winter. She smiled at the room harder because the cold had to go somewhere, and if she did not direct it, it would land in her bones. She cut her eyes toward the circling crowd and found approval cheap and thin. It warmed nothing. "Look at them," she said softly. "They have chosen sides and told themselves they haven't." "They always do," the prince replied. He shifted his hand against her back, a pressure that said we are winning while the pulse said something else. The music slowed, a graceful decrescendo designed to usher applause into being. Hands rose, palms touched. The clapping came careful and loud enough to be heard from the street, if the street had cared to listen. It did not. The street had its own applause. It used stones and shouted slogans. The court pretended not to hear that orchestra. A master of ceremonies moved his way to a position in which he could be noticed without seeming to ask for attention. He lifted his voice with the practiced ease of a man who understood how much air to push into a room to keep it afloat without capsizing it. "A toast," he announced. "To constancy." Glasses lifted because hands know what to do, even when hearts do not. The prince took a glass from a passing tray. The mistress did the same and held hers lower than his. The princess did not reach immediately. She allowed someone to notice that too. Delay was a language she spoke with fluency. The master of ceremonies paused, eyes flicking over faces for permission to continue. He did not hold power. He held a baton that beat time for those who did. When no one stopped him, he smiled small and true. "To the virtues that keep our world steady," he said. The phrase acquired an edge as it moved through the air. It cut the first row of listeners and scraped the second. The prince raised his glass and said nothing. Words would have given the toast a shape. Silence let it be what people wanted it to be. The court drank. The princess lifted her glass and touched it to her lips, tasting very little. She set it down without placing it far. She felt the eyes asking if she would take the bait. She never took bait. She let it rot where it lay. The mistress allowed her wine to touch her mouth like an oath that meant nothing. She flicked a glance at the prince and found him watching the princess again. The glance was not possessive. It was arithmetic, one man counting the cost of his choices while pretending to be above numbers. The murmur that followed the toast was richer, deeper. Relief loosened shoulders. People congratulated themselves on their wits for having survived a dangerous moment without being injured by meaning. The mistress laughed softly at a comment she did not hear. She placed her glass on the tray of a passing servant, and in the movement saw a ripple at the far end of the hall. A nobleman stepped forward. He did not hurry. He did not need to. The space made itself around him because people believed themselves good at predicting where spectacle would appear and preferred not to block it. He wore his rank the way another man might wear a sword, visible, dangerous, elegant. The mistress felt the prick of a new danger and went still. Beside her, the prince's gaze sharpened. Across the hall, the princess's fan paused, open. The nobleman's eyes moved over the room like a blade laid on a table to remind everyone what could be done if anyone lost their temper. He bowed toward the master of ceremonies but did not look at him. He looked at the people. Then he lifted his hand. A sealed letter sat in his palm. Wax glowed dull red in the light. The stamp was simple. The meaning was not. The room did not yet know what it was looking at, only that it would need to pick a side soon. The master of ceremonies faltered. "My lord?" he said, the title more exhale than speech. The nobleman smiled without warmth. "A document," he said, and his voice carried to the corners because he knew how to use a room. "A matter of honor." Honor was another of those words the court loved for its capacity to wound without leaving marks. It moved through the hall and found throats willing to carry it. The prince's jaw tightened. The mistress felt the corded anger hitch his breath. She placed 2 fingers, light, against his sleeve. Not to calm him, but to tell him she was here. Whatever being here would mean when this finished. The princess rose, not hastily, not slowly. She did not move toward the nobleman. She did not retreat. She stood. The fan tilted, and then stilled. The room adjusted its weight to account for her vertical grace. Standing could be many things. She made it a decision. "Perhaps later," the prince said, his words directed toward the nobleman and also toward the crowd, toward the night itself. He gave a smile designed to remind everyone that he could take the sting out of anything if he chose. "Later is where cowards live," someone near the back whispered, too softly to be named and too loud to be completely safe. The whisper slid along the floor and curled around ankles. People pretended not to feel it. The nobleman did not look at the prince when he answered him. He looked at the princess. "Some matters prefer daylight," he said. The mistress's mouth went dry. The prince's fingers flexed once at his side. All the control he let himself have. The hall tilted toward the nobleman the way a field tilts toward a storm. The letter in his hand seemed suddenly heavier. He held it up, not high, only high enough. The seal flashed like a fresh wound. He took a breath the room borrowed and spent. "This," he said into the silence that formed with uncanny eagerness, "questions the virtue of Her Highness." The word virtue touched the floor and broke like glass. Pieces of it found feet, cut them, drew nothing but the smallest wince. The court loved blood it could walk away from. The princess did not blink. Her face arranged itself into its usual calm, the kind that welcomed and refused pity at once. The prince swayed by the smallest measure, as if the ground had kicked at him and he had decided to pretend it was a dance step. He looked at the letter and saw not wax and paper, but a thing that could become a weapon if he gave it permission. "Evidence," the nobleman said, and the music, which had been trying to re-bloom on its own out of habit, strangled itself and died. He smiled again, broader, a host pleased to see guests hungry. A servant nearly stumbled and did not. A woman's fan snapped shut with a crack that ricocheted off gilt and glass. The air smelled briefly of candle smoke and cold tin. The prince's eyes found the princess and held there. They did not ask forgiveness. They asked readiness. They asked war. Her chin lifted a breath's width. It was enough. People leaned forward as if drawn by a hand. The nobleman turned to the nearest table and set the letter upon a silver tray as if it were a sacrament. He lifted it again with ceremony and faced the room. He raised the sealed letter and called it proof against the princess. The letter gleamed on the tray as if it had gathered every flicker of candlelight for itself. The nobleman's hand lingered above it, steady, deliberate, savoring the weight of silence he had manufactured. Around him the court breathed shallowly, dozens of lungs afraid to fill themselves in case sound might mark them as accomplices. The chandeliers did not sway, yet the air itself seemed to tilt. The princess did not move closer. She remained standing where she had risen, her body still, her face carved into calm. The fan in her hand hung loose, neither hiding nor fanning, simply present, like a blade she would not yet unsheathe. Her heart beat faster, each pulse loud against the cage of her ribs. But nothing of that truth left her body. The court would see only stillness. The prince's throat felt tight as he swallowed. The letter looked small, ridiculous even, in its wax and folded paper. Yet the power of it was undeniable. He glanced once at his wife. Their eyes met, and in that silent collision he saw what he had always feared. She did not need him to stand upright. She never had. He looked away too quickly. The mistress shifted at his side. Her fingers twitched once, brushing against the edge of her gown as though she longed to reach for the letter herself and end the play before it began. But she did not. She knew better than to claim attention at this moment. She knew her survival depended on watching, not acting. The nobleman lifted his chin, his voice calm, a tone chosen for cruelty disguised as duty. This came into my possession through channels of concern. It carries words that no loyal subject should ignore. He set the sealed fold back upon the tray. I present it not to injure, but to preserve the honor of this house. Whispers licked across the hall like flames. They never rose loud enough to obscure him, but they carried the weight of appetite. Court society always fed best on blood. The princess breathed once, long, deliberate, until her lungs steadied. She stepped forward, not toward the tray, but toward the nobleman himself. Her movement turned heads with audible rustles of silk. She stopped short of him, her gaze neither sharp nor yielding, but fixed. "You present words sealed, not spoken," she said. "If your duty is preservation, break it. Or else you preserve only your own cowardice." The court inhaled as one, startled that she had spoken at all, startled more at the steel beneath her calm. The nobleman's mouth twitched, the faintest acknowledgement of discomfort, yet he covered it with another smile. "It is not my place to judge. It is the court's place to see." "Then show them," she said. The prince clenched his jaw. He could feel the rope tighten around them both. He wanted to seize the letter, to tear it, to burn it before its contents could breathe. But he knew the court would not see defiance in that act. They would see guilt. And he had given them enough reasons already to mock him. "Perhaps this theater has gone far enough," he interjected. His voice carried, trained to fill such halls. A sealed parchment means nothing until it is proven. "Shall we lower ourselves to rumors dressed in wax?" The nobleman turned to him then, the first time he had granted him the courtesy of direct attention. "Your Highness," he said, bowing lightly, "if the matter were trivial, I would have left it in the shadows. But the shadow has grown. Best to let light confirm or deny." His hand reached toward the seal. The princess did not flinch, though inside her chest constricted. She wondered what words had been written there. Lies, almost certainly, spun from envy or revenge. Yet lies, when written, carried a permanence that whispers could never achieve. She braced herself. The wax cracked beneath the nobleman's finger. The sound was sharp in the stillness, like a branch snapping in a forest. Every head leaned forward. The parchment unfolded slowly, painfully, as though savoring the suspense of its own unveiling. Then it rested open on the tray, its contents visible only to him. He scanned the words, and his lips pressed together. The court strained, hungry. At last he looked up, but before he could speak, the Queen Mother's voice cut through the air. "Enough!" The hall froze. She had entered without parade, her figure framed now in the high doorway, veiled in shadow and candlelight. Her face was lined not by years alone, but by the weight of authority long carried. She moved with measured steps, each one claiming silence as her own. No one had noticed her arrival, and yet all eyes now bent to her. She approached the center, the tray, the nobleman, the princess. Her gaze was cold as winter frost, pausing briefly on each face. "You speak of duty," she said to the nobleman. "Do you imagine I have not heard whispers already? Do you think your letter adds weight to the wind?" He bowed low, murmuring, "Your Majesty." Her eyes did not soften. This is not a question to be answered in a hall of gossip. If honor is at stake, it will be judged when dawn arrives, not before. She turned slightly, her voice rising so all could hear. "At first light, the princess shall present her account. Until then, silence." The court shifted, as if a collective chain had been dropped across their shoulders. The orchestra, uncertain, did not resume. The servants hovered like ghosts, waiting for orders. Only the Queen Mother stood with certainty, her hand on the tray now, closing the letter again with finality. The princess exhaled, but not with relief. The reprieve was no absolution. It was a delay, a crueler kind of torment, for it demanded she wait, carry the accusation upon her shoulders until the morning. She inclined her head to the Queen Mother, neither thankful nor resentful, but resolute. The prince's stomach twisted. He should have spoken sooner, should have shielded her. Instead, he had watched, calculating, until another's authority spared her. He felt the hollow victory of a man who had failed his own courage. The mistress clasped her hands before her gown, lowering her gaze just enough to appear modest, though her mind raced. Dawn would decide more than innocence. It would decide survival. And survival was her trade. The Queen Mother gestured once, and the tray was carried away, letter sealed again. She addressed no one in particular, yet all obeyed. "This night is over." Then she turned and departed the way she had come, her absence as commanding as her presence. Conversations resumed in muted threads. No laughter now, only whispers that slithered across marble floors and into the corners where shadows clung. The courtiers separated into clusters, each speculating, each aligning themselves invisibly to a side not yet declared. The princess remained standing, her posture unbroken. She could feel their eyes like knives pressed flat against her skin. She could feel the ground beneath her, as though it might split at any moment. Yet she did not yield. Her dignity was her last fortress. The prince stepped toward her, but stopped short. He could not bring himself to speak here, not under the court's gaze. His throat closed around the words he might have offered. He turned away instead, his hand brushing against his mistress's arm, as though she were the easier presence. The princess watched him retreat, and for the first time that night, her hand trembled against the fan. Not visible enough for the court to see, only enough for her to feel. She straightened again, swallowing the weakness whole. She would not collapse in their sight. The hall emptied slowly, like a theater after a tragedy where no applause dared follow. Silk skirts whispered, buckled shoes clicked. The chandeliers swayed faintly as drafts slipped in from open doors. Servants extinguished candles in long rows, plunging corners into shadow, while the air thickened with the aftertaste of scandal. The nobleman disappeared among the dispersing crowd, his face unreadable. The mistress lingered close to the prince, speaking little, but her silence carried volumes. The princess stood alone, a figure carved from resilience, lit by the last stubborn flames of candles nearly spent. The murmur of retreating voices faded down marble corridors. A few loyal gazes lingered on her as they passed, some pitying, some cruel, most curious. She did not grant them expression. She allowed herself only one breath, long and steady, before she turned toward the emptying doorway. In the high hall, now half dark, the weight of dawn pressed forward already. It was no longer hours away. It was waiting just beyond the windows, ready to burn her or vindicate her. And as the last echo of voices left the chamber, the Queen Mother's decree still hung in the air. At dawn, the princess must answer. The decree still rang in the emptied hall like a bell that refused to stop trembling. The princess stood in the thinning light, the fan cool against her palm, the candles surrendering one by one to the slow hand of servants. Her name hung in the air without a voice to hold it. At dawn, she must answer. The words were simple. The weight was not. She moved at last. No hurry, no show of frailty. The hem of her gown skimmed the marble, gathering whispers of wax and dust. The echo of her steps belonged to her again now that the crowd had yielded it. A door opened before she reached it. A footman bowed so low his breath touched the floor. He did not meet her eyes. No one did. That was the price of spectacle. Once seen, you were no longer looked at. The corridor beyond the hall held its own cold. Tapestries breathed the smoke of long-dead fires. Sconces threw small, stubborn flames against pale stone, making the shadows seem gentler than they were. She walked with the measured pace of someone refusing to be chased. The fan tapped once against her wrist. It steadied her. Behind her, heels clicked, then hesitated. She did not turn. She could feel him, the particular gravity of the prince, made of perfume, pride, and the attention he carried like a cloak. He did not call her name. He did not have to. The corridor tightened around his silence. She reached her chamber and paused with her hand on the latch. The door was a boundary she controlled in a house that controlled everything else. She could close it. She could deny him entry. The thought was sweet and thin. She opened it instead. The chamber received her without ceremony. The fire was low, the coals a red map drawn in breath. The air had the stale softness of a room waiting to be used again. A chair angled toward the hearth. A table held a carafe of water and 2 glasses, because habit completed scenes before their actors chose to. She stepped inside and did not sit. The fan rested on the table, lilies turned toward the ceiling. She traced one petal with a fingertip, and then pulled her hand back as if from heat. A knock sounded against the door, polite to the point of insolence. She answered without raising her voice. Enter. He came in with a carefulness that almost missed the threshold. He closed the door with his hand, not a gesture he performed often. The sound of it lodged in the room and did not leave. He stood with the span of the chamber between them, and took her in with a gaze that tried to be a man's, and failed at being a prince's. You should not be alone, he said. I am not. She gestured lightly to the fan, the fire, the walls that listened better than people did. I have everything I have been given. He winced at the gentleness more than he would have at an accusation. He approached the table, stopped, then approached again, as if distance could be negotiated like a treaty. Up close, the powder at his temple held the faint sheen of sweat. His hand lifted toward the fan and hovered. I can call for more firewood, he said. It is cold. Cold is useful, she replied. It tells the truth. Their eyes held for the length of a candle drip. He looked away first. I should have picked it up. She let the words lie between them, as if they were coins tossed into a fountain. Wishes, not payment. It fell, she said. It was bound to, one way or another. I meant more than that. I know. She turned then and crossed to the hearth. The warmth met her wrists and climbed her sleeves like a careful animal. You do not need to tell me what I have already understood. He followed, stopping on the other side of the fire's small light. In it his face softened, lost some cutting edge of polish. He looked like the man she had met before he learned what applause could do to a hungry heart. He swallowed a sentence, then released the one beneath it. I did this. Yes, she said. There was no cruelty in the agreement, only the fact named. He took the blow and did not stagger. I thought it would quiet them, he went on. If they saw, he caught himself. If they believed I had chosen my life rather than trapped myself inside it, they would stop laughing. They will never stop, she said. They do not know how. He exhaled, a laugh spoiled before it began. The letter, he said, grabbing at the worst of their thoughts like a man facing a wave. I do not know what it is. I do not know who put it into his hand. Does it matter? She asked. Everything matters, he said. At dawn, every word matters. I wanted a game. They brought a knife. She looked at him then as if seeing, through him, the outline of all the rooms he had ever entered, hoping to be pleased by his reflection. I will not bow to a letter. I know. He took a step closer. The air between them warmed. But there are those who will make you. There are those who have been waiting to. You, for instance, she said. He flinched, but he did not step back. Yes, he said softly. Me. Silence settled. It was not empty. It carried the weight of their whole marriage and the pieces they had dropped. The fire shifted, releasing a sigh. Somewhere in the corridor a footfall hesitated and went on. He reached for the fan then, not quickly, but with the intention of a man offering back what he had stolen. His fingers touched the silk. He stopped. May I? You may hold it, she said. You may not speak for it. He nodded and lifted it. The lilies faced him now. He studied them like a script he had not learned. I had one once, he said, surprising himself. When I was a boy, I tried to snap it open the way I had seen, with that sharp crack. I cut my finger on the bone. Did you bleed? Yes. Did you show anyone? No. He rotated the fan and closed it with a careful pressure. There was no crack. I did not want them to see how badly I wanted to be someone else. She watched the fan in his hand. You still want that. He did not argue. It is late, he said, not as a dismissal but as a fact that contained the shape of the coming dawn. You should rest. You should stop advising me to do what you are unable to do yourself, she said. You do not sleep when you regret. She used regret because it was the only word he could bear the sound of. He let it lay. The door knocked again, softer this time. Neither of them moved. The knock repeated. He set the fan down and turned toward the interruption. Who is it? A voice evenly pitched answered. Permit me. He looked to the princess. She inclined her head once, a queen granting audience where none was owed. He opened the door. The mistress entered with her gaze lowered in a posture learned in salons where pity is punished with boredom. She closed the door behind her and stood just inside it, as if the space itself were a precipice. The fire threw her shadow long. This is not your hour, the prince said. No hour is mine, she replied, looking up now, her voice steady. Unless it is lent to me. Her gaze flickered to the princess and held. I will be brief. The princess gestured toward the chair near the hearth. You may speak standing, she said. It is easier to leave quickly that way. The mistress accepted the condition with a dip of the head. She gripped her hands together at her waist, as if to hold them from doing anything foolish. I have played a part I thought would keep me alive, she said. I do not apologize for wanting to live. I do apologize for the harm my wanting has done. The prince's jaw moved once, then held still. Say what you came to say. The letter, she said, and her voice wavered for the first time. Not with fear of consequence so much as with fear that she had misjudged the line between confession and suicide. It is not a love letter. It is not yours. It was placed. Men who will not touch scandal with bare hands wrapped it in wax and gave it a name to kill with. The princess's eyes narrowed, the first visible shift all night. You are certain? I did not write it, the mistress said. I did not see its words. I saw it move. That is all. I saw a purse change hands and another hand point toward a name that would make the court lean. You were told to be here tonight, the prince said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. I was told to be obvious. I was told to be beautiful for you and foolish for them. I was told there would be reward for boldness. What reward? The princess asked. Forgiveness of debt I never incurred freely, she said lightly, as if naming it made it weigh less. Protection from mouths that open doors or close them with a word. I have nothing of my own. They keep ledgers. I wanted to become a line they could not erase. And in doing so, the princess said, you tried to erase me. The mistress's eyes flinched at that, then steadied. I tried to make myself visible enough to survive. I am not noble. I am not kind. But I have no wish to be used to end you. Now, the prince murmured. Now you have no wish? She looked at him with a candor that burned. Now I have seen her, she said. Not in a salon, not across a dance. I have seen what it is to stand while a room eats you alive. I cannot do it. Her throat tightened. She forced the words through. I do not know what is written. I do not know who sealed it. But if you open it in a room that hates silence, it will become true regardless of the ink. The fire cracked. A coal slid. The room listened. The princess stepped closer, not to comfort, not to strike. Why tell us? She asked. Because I want a chance to live a day without serving a lie, the mistress said. Because I thought I could ride the current you created and not drown. Because I am tired. Because I saw the letter and saw my own grave in it. Do you have a name for the hands that moved it? The prince asked, though he knew he would receive none. Names at court are currency. She had already spent more than she owned by speaking. I have hands without names, she said. Gloves without hands. I have gestures in shadow. I have promises made in the breath between songs. If I give you a face, it will be the wrong one. So we have fear and confession, the princess said, quiet now. We have absence and presence. We have a letter and no author. How does this help me at dawn? The mistress swallowed. It helps you know that nothing in that room is honest, she said. It helps you decide whether to play their game or break it. She should not have to break it alone, the prince said before he could stop himself. No, the mistress agreed. She did not look at him when she said it. Silence settled again, complex as lace. The prince moved to the table and poured water into a glass. He offered it to the mistress. She took it in both hands as if it might escape. She drank and placed it back, careful not to leave a mark on the wood. I do not ask forgiveness, she said to the princess. I ask you not to mistake my greed for malice. I have done wrong. I am trying to choose a smaller wrong. The princess's mouth softened by a degree that would have been invisible to any but a person standing so near the fire that heat made eyes prick. Thank you for bringing what you have, she said. It is late. The mistress understood she was dismissed, and that the dismissal was a gift, not a punishment. She bowed, this time not low, but true. She turned to the door, paused, then looked back once. If you must stand alone at dawn, she said, stand knowing I will not watch with hunger. Go, the prince said. His voice held no command. It held weariness. She left. The latch clicked softly. The corridor reclaimed her footsteps. The room inhaled once she was gone, the way rooms do when a certain kind of pressure leaves. The prince faced the fire and felt the place in his chest where his vanity lived begin to ache as if it had been wrenched. He glanced at the fan, at the lilies, at the hand that had rested over them before they fell. She is right, he said. It does not matter what is written. It matters who speaks first, and how loudly. It matters who believes, the princess said. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain back a hand's breadth. The night beyond was dense, the sky pressing close to the glass as if listening. A faint glow at the horizon, no more than the idea of light, stirred. The court will believe what saves it the trouble of thinking. He joined her, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. Neither stepped away. The reflection in the window showed two figures not touching, bound by air. I cannot take it back, he said. No, she replied, but you can stop taking. He turned the words over. They cut, then cleaned. I thought I knew how to command a room, he said. Tonight it commanded me. You fed it, she said. It will always ask for more. I do not have more, he said. It was the barest confession. She let the curtain fall back into place. Dawn will come whether we stand ready or not. I am not ready, he said. You will be, she answered, and for the first time something like warmth moved through the line of her voice. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not even hope. Recognition. You will speak. Consider what you wish those words to become when they are repeated by mouths that do not love you. He nodded. He felt the invisible audience leaning even here, in this small room, as if the palace had lungs and listened. And you? I will stand, she said. I will not bow to a letter. If they ask for shame, I will give them silence. It weighs more. Let me do something, he said, and the urgency in him made his hand shake as it reached for the fan. He lifted it and closed it in his palm, the smooth sticks held with a care that might as well have been prayer. Let me carry this. Carry it, she said. Not for me, for yourself, so your hands remember what it is to hold without breaking. He pressed the fan against his chest, as if his heart needed a tutor. He looked at her and found in her face the same calm that had unnerved the hall. It did not frighten him now. It steadied him. His breath steadied. They stood in the failing firelight, the room shrinking around them as heat surrendered to the hour. The sounds of the palace at night crept in, distant doors closing, a cough, the brush of a skirt. Somewhere the memory of music wandered like a ghost that had forgotten its melody. He set the fan gently on the table again and stepped back. I will not leave you to go through this alone, he said. You have already left me, she replied, without venom. But you may walk with me now. He nodded, accepting the truth and the offer inside it. He looked at the coals and the last small flame. He did not call for more wood. He let the fire fade, as if the room must grow dark to let the morning be real when it came. He moved to the door, and then paused, turning back once more. If they ask me why I am here, I will tell them I am tired of hearing my own name spoken with such emptiness. Better, she said, to tell them mine. He swallowed and bowed his head. It was not a courtly bow. It was the small acknowledgement a man gives when he sees the size of another's strength. Very well. He left. The latch made that soft click again. The princess remained at the window, hand on the curtain's edge, eyes lifted toward a sky that had not changed for kings. The room cooled around her. She lifted the fan and opened it. The lilies spread like a breath taken without pain. She stood like that for a long moment, inhaling the smell of ash and linen, listening to the palace learn the shape of the coming day. When she finally let the curtain drop, the barest gray had begun to gather at the rim of the world, thin as promise and twice as fragile. The sky was pale with the first breath of morning when the court assembled again. Versailles had not slept. The corridors whispered all night, candles replaced one after another so that gossip would not die in the dark. Now, as dawn pushed its thin light through tall windows, nobles pressed together in the hall, their silks duller under the honest glow. The chandeliers seemed tired. Even the mirrors looked less forgiving. The princess entered without escort. Her gown was the same as the night before, creased slightly at the hem, as if to remind them she had stood through hours of waiting. She carried the fan at her side, closed, lilies folded, its silence louder than any ornament. Her steps were measured, not fast, not hesitant. She walked like one who accepted that the world might end today, but refused to let it claim her posture. The prince was already there. He had not slept either, but the powder on his face disguised the night. His shoulders bore the stiffness of too many masks worn too long. Yet in his hand he held the fan he had promised to carry, and the act steadied him. He watched her approach, and for the first time in months, he did not search her expression for advantage. He searched it for courage, and he found it. The Queen Mother sat at the center, her gaze sweeping over the crowd like a blade. Around her, Nobles arranged themselves with the care of gamblers laying down cards. The nobleman who had raised the letter stood nearby, his chin lifted, waiting for the moment when scandal would become truth. The princess stopped in the circle cleared for her. She inclined her head to the Queen Mother, but did not bow. Silence stretched, waiting for her words. Before she could speak, the prince stepped forward. The hall shifted, startled. His voice was steady, but beneath it ran the crack of confession. "I will speak first." The Queen Mother raised a brow. "You are not the one accused." "Then let me be." His gaze moved across the court, refusing to avoid their stares. "I invited shame into this hall. I made my marriage a spectacle. I paraded vanity as though it were strength. I thought myself admired, but I was only pitied. If there is guilt here, it is mine." The mistress stood among the crowd, her eyes lowered, hands clasped tightly. She had no role now but to watch, and yet every word struck her as if spoken into her bones. She prayed silently that he would not falter. The Queen Mother studied him. "And the letter?" "False," he said. He did not hesitate. "A fabrication, born of hunger for scandal. I name it such before it is even read. I know this woman." He turned to the princess, his voice dropping. "I have not treated her as I should, but I know her. She carries dignity, where I have carried only noise. She deserves more than silence in her defense. She deserves truth." The princess felt her chest tighten. Not from disbelief. She had expected nothing from him this morning, but from the weight of hearing what she had longed for. He had not said love, not yet, but he had given her respect in front of the wolves. It was a beginning. Murmurs darted through the crowd like startled birds. Some faces softened, others hardened. The nobleman holding the letter frowned, his advantage slipping through his fingers. He tried to recover. "Words are wind, Your Highness. Proof is ink. If the seal is opened—" The Queen Mother silenced him with a raised hand. Her eyes returned to the prince. "You would stake your honor on hers?" "Yes." His answer came quickly, and it rang through the chamber. "Let it be mine to lose if I lie." The Queen Mother's gaze slid to the princess. "And you?" The princess lifted the fan, opening it with one soft crack. She held it not to hide, but as a banner. "I have nothing to confess," she said, her voice calm. "No letter, no betrayal. Only silence where you demand noise. If you wish to exile me for silence, so be it. I will not kneel before a lie." The court trembled with the courage of her words. Nobles exchanged glances, but none dared step forward to challenge her. The strength in her tone left no space for accusation. Her stillness commanded more than their whispers. The Queen Mother's eyes narrowed, as though measuring not only their words, but the air itself. At last, she inclined her head. "Then the matter rests. The letter will not be read. The court has no appetite for shadows it cannot prove." Relief moved through the room like a breath. Conversations returned, low, uncertain, careful, but the princess and the prince remained at the center, bound in a silence heavier than any judgment. He turned to her, his voice quiet, meant only for her ears, though the room still hummed around them. "You saved yourself." Her eyes did not leave his. "No, you saved me when you chose to speak." He shook his head. "Too late." "Not too late," she said. The fan closed in her hand, a soft click. "Only late." He understood the difference. It opened something in him that had long been locked. He stepped closer, daring the eyes around them. "If they see us, let them see us together." "They always have," she whispered. "They only pretended otherwise." The Queen Mother rose then, her chair scraping softly against stone. The court fell silent once more. She cast a long look over them all, then spoke with the finality of judgment. "This house stands. Let no one here seek to shake it further." She left without flourish, her attendants following. One by one the nobles began to drift away. their appetite for spectacle unsated, but their fear greater. The nobleman who had presented the letter bowed stiffly and retreated, his failure unspoken but visible in every line of his shoulders. The mistress slipped quietly into the shadows, her eyes lingering once on the princess. There was no triumph there, only acknowledgement. Then she was gone, absorbed into the dispersing tide. The hall emptied until only the prince and the princess remained. The chandeliers burned low, their wax spent. The morning sun claimed the windows, casting honest light across their faces. For the first time, there were no witnesses. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then touched it. The warmth startled him, as though he had expected her to be colder after all he had done. She let his hand rest there, not granting forgiveness, but granting space. "I nearly lost you," he said. "You nearly lost yourself," she answered. "And in doing so, you nearly took me with you." He bowed his head. "Will you stay?" Her fingers tightened slightly on the fan. She looked at him, and what she saw was no longer a man draped in vanity, but one stripped bare by shame. "I will stay," she said, "if you stand beside me, not before me." He nodded, and the weight of it was more than a promise. It was a surrender. "Beside you," he said, "always." The sun climbed higher, filling the hall with light that erased the shadows left by candles. He lifted her hand to his lips, not in ceremony, but in devotion. She did not pull away. For the first time she felt the court's gaze gone, leaving them only to themselves. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not apology, not absolution, but recognition that they were stronger together than apart. The fan slipped between them as he placed it back into her hand. She closed it firmly, sealing their vow in the sound. Beyond the palace, faint shouts rose from the city, the murmur of a storm that would soon break across all their lives. But inside this hall, for one fragile, luminous moment, they stood unshaken. And in the brightness of that morning, she knew that though kingdoms might fall, their dignity, shared, rebuilt, and newly born, would endure. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.